Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Welcome back everyone to another lecture in this module. Inshallah, in today's lecture, we will actually begin the chapter of the jizya. We did I did some introductory remarks in the previous lecture. We're going to begin in the sense that we're going to read the text and talk about the jizya tax. And one of the things that's important for me, for you to understand, is this concept of Ahlul Kitab. So um, there'll be some references to it in the text and in the Hashia, but I'm going to extrapolate a little bit on it because of kind of the condition that we live in today's world. Everything is so interconnected. And I want you to pay very close attention to that concept of Ahlul Kitab. So you see how the fuqaha understood the primary texts, in this case, the direction of the Prophet ﷺ. And therefore, hopefully, in doing that, I hope I do a good job, that will expand your understanding of the concept of Ahlul Kitab. And then, following that, following the discussion on the points of the jizya tax and how it's taken and the amount it is, etc., who it's the contract, who it's with, then we're going to start talking about some of the conditions that are based on, or the results based on the contract of the jizya. Particularly with neighboring countries that are not Muslim, that maybe have some citizens that live with us. So this is sort of the beginning discussions of diplomatic relations, and something that might also be found in a fuller discussion in the books of the Siyasa Sharia, Islamic governance. But because jizya is a part or is a logical follow-up from the discussion of jihad, it makes sense that we would talk about it in a book of fiqh. And indeed, there are many hadith that talk about that, and there are multiple stories from the Sunnah about how the Prophet ﷺ made peace with other nations, and there's this diplomatic exchange that's pegged by this exchange of money and services based on that. So while we read the text and we get the law, I want you to also in the back of your mind be thinking of those other things and how that's at play as well. Don't just be limited to what we talk about. Anyway, simple lecture, inshallah. We'll begin in the next clip. All right, we begin the way we always begin, which is to turn to the text itself. قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين. فصل في الجزية. وشرائط وجوب الجزية 5 خصال: البلوغ والعقل والحرية والذكورية، وأن يكون من أهل الكتاب أو ممن له شبهة كتاب. وأقل الجزية دينار في كل حول، ويؤخذ من المتوسطين ديناران، ومن الموسر 4 دنانير. ويجوز أن يشترط عليهم الضيافة فضلا على مقدار الجزية. ويتضمن عقد الجزية 4 أشياء: أن يؤدوا الجزية، وأن تجري عليهم أحكام الإسلام، وأن لا يذكروا دين الإسلام إلا بخير، وأن لا يفعلوا ما فيه ضرر على المسلمين. Okay, that's the portion. Let's look at the translation of what Abu Shuja says, radiallahu anhu. May Allah Ta'ala bless him, and may we benefit from his knowledge in this world and the next. Okay, there are 5 conditions which make the jizya, the non-Muslim poll tax, obligatory. The person paying it must be mature, of sound mind, free, a male, and a member of the people of the book, or those who have something that could be revelation. The minimum amount for the jizya is 1 dinar yearly. 2 dinars are taken from the middle class and 4 from the affluent. It is permissible to stipulate that they accommodate travelers in addition to the jizya. The contract with non-Muslim subjects consists of 4 things. The non-Muslim subjects must pay the jizya, comply with Islamic law, mention only good things about Islam and not do anything that harms the Muslims. I actually don't think I'll get through that entire list, but we'll do the best we can. Okay, let's look at the adilla of this section. Verse 29 of Tawbah. سورة التوبة قاتلوا الذين لا يؤمنون بالله ولا باليوم الآخر ولا يحرمون ما حرم الله ورسوله ولا يدينون دين الحق من الذين أوتوا الكتاب حتى يعطوا الجزية عن يد وهم صاغرون. So that the fighting takes place until the jizya is paid. That verse. Bukhari and Muslim narrate that Amr ibn al-Auf was sent to by the Prophet ﷺ, on the authority of Amr ibn al-Auf, that the Prophet ﷺ sent Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah to Bahrain to collect the jizya. And then also Abu Dawood narrates on the authority of Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu that the Prophet ﷺ sent Khalid ibn al-Walid to Uqaydir, Doma, to take the jizya. Bukhari narrates on the authority of that Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh, did not take the jizya with the Majus until he saw or heard Abdul Rahman ibn Auf say that the Prophet ﷺ took jizya from the Majus of Hajar. This will be important when we talk about this concept of Ahlul Kitab. And Umar radiallahu anhu, as is narrated in Bayhaqi, wrote to his deputies when he was the Khalifa not to take the jizya from women and children. As far as the dinar, Mu'adh narrates, as this is in Abu Dawood, that the Prophet ﷺ, when he sent him to Yemen, he told him to take a dinar per person. Or its equivalent in a type of clothing that was in Yemen. So one of the things in the fiqh, I wasn't really going to get into it, but because of the adilla, it is, I might as well say it now, is that is the jizya agreement actually a dinar, or could it be the equivalent value of a dinar? Funny enough, which I found peculiar, is that the dominant position inside the madhab is it has to actually be a dinar. Thank God there's a dissenting opinion, because then because the text is very clear in this text of Abu Dawood that the Prophet ﷺ told Mu'adh to take a dinar or its equivalent. So alhamdulillah we have that. But that's something just from a point of view, I'm just making a mental note. From a research point of view, I'd love to get into the very longer books of fiqh and understand why is that the dominant position for us versus its equivalency. Because we allow for the equivalency in other areas like in zakah and things like that, and kafara and things like that. Anyway, let's see about the different levels of denanir that are taken from different, if people are wealthy or not wealthy. This is from, I think, Bayhaqi. Yeah, that Umar radiallahu anhu increased the jizya on those that were wealthy. Okay, I think that that's enough of the adilla. We might as well just jump into the text itself. Okay, let me get the hashia going and begin the discussion, inshallah. Okay, so the first thing that we read about the jizya, actually, I want to actually go back for a real quick second to the actually very beginning of the chapter. So here we're going to talk about the jizya, and in the translation, this translation, the title is "Non-Muslim Subjects of the Islamic State." So, people that are living within Dar al-Islam. So he says there are 5 conditions which make the jizya obligatory. Mature, of sound mind, and free. Okay, so those are standard. We've talked about them over and over again throughout Islamic law book. So there's no jizya on a child. There's no jizya on somebody who's majnoon, on somebody who's crazy or out of their normal stasis. There's no jizya for a slave, because the jizya of the owner of the slave covers the slave as well, because from that point of view, the slave is then seen as a possession, not as a person. I know that sounds very crass to say, but I mean, I'm just giving you the jurisprudence behind it. And then a male. So there's the jizya on men, not jizya on women. So if you think about it, that excludes a lot of people. So it's just basically kind of able-bodied men. That's where the jizya is taken. So if a person has a family with children and stuff like that, I mean, it's just the man is just going to pay the jizya. So this kind of notion that the Muslims have this like jizya tax, and it's like this debasing thing. I mean, that's not really. You can see it's not really the case. It's just a tax that you pay. I mean, the Muslims are paying zakah and stuff. These people are paying a jizya. It just has a different name. But I mean, if you're going to benefit from the infrastructure of the society, of the country, of the nation, then you're paying something. It's like in this case, it's basically protection money, because you are not going to be asked to fight. That's what we said when we began the discussion previously. Is that the person is not going to fight. Now the next condition, the members of the people of the book, or those who have something that could be revelation, that's what I wanted to spend a little bit of time on. And I see that I'm running out of time in this clip. So rather than begin that discussion now, because there's no time, inshallah we'll do that in the next clip. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. Okay, let me just backtrack for a quick second to talk about the conditions. I want to see if I mentioned, and if I didn't mention anything. So we said that somebody has to be mature, of sound mind, free. We talked about that. Male. Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess there's really nothing else to say about that. Okay. Now let's talk about the fifth condition, which is that a member of the people of the book, or those who have something that could be revelation. So the first thing to say about that is the textbook definition of the people of the book for us are the Jews and the Christians. And that's the first kind of layer of the definition. So when we talk about the Jews and the Christians, we also have to keep in mind that there are different sects of Jews and Christians. As long as the core beliefs are the same, let's just say there's like different Jewish sects, but the core belief is the same, that they would refer maybe to each other as Jews, but maybe they would say like, well, we're the real Jews, not them, but they're still implying that the other person is a Jew. Then for us, they're all Jews from this point of view. It's not from a theological point of view. We're not here to talk about and adjudicate between their inner issues. I'm talking about how we would interpret the different sects. Same thing with Christianity. So there are huge differences between Protestant Christianity and Catholic Christianity, Orthodox Christians, etc. Huge theological differences. I mean, to the point that there were crusades from Christians against Christians. But it's ironic, they still refer to each other as Christian from the macro level. So for us, as long as those core beliefs, not the furu'a, but the usul are shared, then we refer to them as Christian, all of these different churches as Christians, and all of these different sects or denominations as Jewish, for example, in the case of Christians and Jews. Okay, so that's like kind of like the first level. So for us, from the point of view of how we view in our Muslim nation A, that we've been talking about, how we would view the Christian and the Jewish population. For us, it's just one block of Christians and Jews, even though we acknowledge that there are differences between the churches, the theologies, and the practices. But in our language, that's a difference in furu'a, not a difference in usul. Okay. And then he says, related to that, or those who have something that could be a revelation. And in this regards, this is the kind of the next level of definition. In the traditional books of fiqh, this is used to describe how we treat the Majus, the Magians, or actually, sorry, the Majus are the Zoroastrians, because the Prophet ﷺ said, and this is what the hadith is in, I think it's al-Bayhaqi. Let me just get you the takhrij really quickly. Yeah, al-Bayhaqi. Sannu bihim sunnat ahl al-kitab. Treat them the way, give them the sunnah, the same sunnah as the sunnah of ahl al-kitab, meaning the Jews and Christians. So for us, therefore, now we go from the first layer from the first level to the second level, so something wider, that anybody that has something that looks like a book, what we would call a kitab, i.e. a sharia, or there is some kind of original revelation, we consider that person Ahlul Kitab from this point of view. So, if you think about that, of course we're talking about pre-Islamic religions. If you think about that, almost all these pre-Islamic religions and traditions are Ahlul Kitab, because they have something that resembles a book, like the Dharmic faith. The Hindus have the Vedas, the Buddhists have their original writings of Buddha, etc. This is not a value statement on the veracity of those texts. It's not, for us, that's irrelevant here. That's maybe something we would talk about in ilm al-kalam or philosophy or something like that. Here we're talking about fiqh. So for us, those people are all considered Ahlul Kitab, because we know that the Quran tells us that there are other kutub. Suhufi Ibrahim and Musa, the books of Abraham and Moses. And actually some of the ulama say that the books of Abraham, which we don't necessarily have anymore, are the Vedas of the Hindus. I mean, it's just ijtihad, Allah alam if that's true. But the point of view is that the Zabur of David, the Psalms of David, Sheath alayhi salam was a prophet, and Sheath alayhi salam had revelation, had books. So there are previous people that have books. So for example, Sheath, most likely all that ancient Egyptian stuff, pharaonic stuff, most likely those are derivatives of that religion. So those people would be considered Ahlul Kitab because they had something that they're following. It doesn't mean that our theology is compatible. That's not what we're talking about. Here we're trying to comply with what the Prophet ﷺ said, is that this is how non-Muslim subjects can live with their own faith within Muslim lands. That's what's really, really key. Now, so that's the second level. So now we've opened the definition of Ahlul Kitab to something that's quite large. Now, the next level after that is what happens if there are mixed marriages, mixed people, in which somebody is a follower of said religion or somebody is an atheist. So in fiqh, we say even if one parent is considered Ahlul Kitab in the widest definition, even if it's the mother, and then the husband is the disbeliever, and even if the children have not adopted the religion of the mother in this example that I just gave, we still treat them as Ahlul Kitab and we give them the jizya contract. Hiqnan lid-dima, so that we can prevent any bloodshed or any civil strife. So the Sharia is being very liberal on this issue because its default and its bias is that we want social cohesion. We have to have social cohesion. And then elsewhere in fiqh we will come to learn that these people are free to, practice their faith. And not only practice their faith, but they can even adjudicate their internal issues and their internal affairs according to their religious traditions. I mean, that will come in a little bit. Related to this as well, is So the first level is the textbook definition of Jews and Christians with its diversity. The second level of was we've opened it to anybody that has something that is similar to a book. And then the third level is that if there are mixed relations, even if there's one person in the family, we give them the jizya tax because we're biased towards that. The fourth level is even if there are things that we don't understand. I don't really know. Is this a religion or is this not a religion? Like let's say like Native American religion or things that are just like, well, I mean, there's definitely something spiritual going on there, but I don't know. Give them the jizya tax. Yani just send bihim sunnat ahl al-kitab. Because حقنا للدماء, because we don't want any be civil strife. So if we're going to coexist together, we're going to be very, very liberal. And this is a very important point because this would completely kind of configure how you think about Muslim societies in the past, in the pre-modern world, particularly Muslim societies in which there were lots of different minority communities. I mean, there were dharmic people, Hindus, Manichaeism. Manichaeism is tradition. If I'm not mistaken, something that came after the advent of Islam. So for us, technically, it's not really a religion, but we're like, it's a derivative of like one of the dharmic faiths. So very, very liberal when it comes to this. This is not an academic, scholarly position to understand, is this faith really, where's the origin? That's not what's happening here. This is kind of like, yeah, it will work. We'll consider that part of the Hindu faith, or we'll consider that a derivative of the Buddhist faith. This is very important because a lot of this has survived in the modern world, where sometimes people attack Muslims as not understanding the nuances. No, it's not that we don't understand. It's just that from one point of view, like in this case, the bias is we're just trying to get along and we're just trying to kind of lump everyone in this kind of larger category of Ahlul Kitab. There is a place to have these deep theological debates, but that will not change the issue of jizya, which we're talking about. So in the concept of jizya, super liberal, super flexible when it comes to it. If we're having a theological debate, a philosophical debate, that's something else. We would, go to the mat to defend our position. So it's just different places have different skill sets. Enough of that. We'll pick up the fiqh in the next clip, inshallah. Okay, let's come back to the text. It's kind of like a mindfulness meditation. Let's bring our attention back to what we were talking about. Let me just reread this just so we're on the same page. There are 5 conditions which make the jizya obligatory: mature, sound of mind, free male, and a member of the people of the book, or those who have something that could be a revelation. That last part, could be revelation, that just kind of really opens the gate. I mean, we're going to let everyone in and want everyone to participate in this plurality. Okay, next point of law, the minimum amount of the jizya is 1 dinar, and of course the dinar and the dirham, the gold coin is the dinar, the dirham is the silver coin. These are the coinages and the currency of Islamic law, and therefore we have to have a connection with what they mean and how they're defined. So the dinar is a 21 karat gold coin. It's around 4.23 grams, and therefore if you weighed that, you would get the dollar value of how much that is, which is, it's like, if you're an American, it's like the equivalent of your car registration per year. I mean, it's a nominal fee. These are nominal fees. It's going to be a couple $100 for the whole year. That's basically what it ends up becoming. And then yearly. Now, about the minimal amount, before I read the rest of the text, Al-Bayjuri, rahimahullah, he says something interesting. He says the minimal amount is a dinar عند قوتنا, when we are strong. وأما عند ضعفنا فتجوز بأقل من dinar, but when we are weak politically, then it is permissible to take less than a dinar. Which I thought this was an interesting phrase, because then from the point of view of law, what is the dalil behind that? And then he says that Al-Khatib Al-Shirbini, rahimahullah, says that it is allowed to take less than a dinar. So that one line about strength and weakness, I'm not sure. Maybe it comes because this hashia of al-Bayjuri is itself a reduction or a summary of a bigger hashia of al-Baramawi, who was the Sheikh of al-Bayjuri, which actually just recently came out. Alhamdulillah, and it's been printed. I have a copy, but I haven't really dealt into it. So that's something I could look up there. But anyway, the point of view is that in the books of fiqh, you will memorize as a Sharia student that the minimum jizya is 1 dinar. However, between me and you, now we know that it actually can be any amount. It can be something less than that. It has nothing to do with strength or weaknesses, but that is an opinion that exists, that it could be less than that. And then he says, and then related to this is what I said in the introductory clip, or maybe it was the first clip. I can't remember where I said it in this lecture. That there's a difference in the madhab, which even now that I'm saying it to you, I just found it very strange, that the majority opinion inside the madhab is it has to actually be the contract of the jizya has to be on the dinar. It can't be its equivalent. However, we just read in the Adillah book the hadith of Mu'adh, Sayyidina Mu'adh radiallahu anhu, that went to Yemen, and then the Prophet ﷺ allowed him to take the equivalent of the jizya from a special type of clothing from Yemen. And as I said, alhamdulillah, there's a difference of opinion because this is something where we don't have the gold coins anymore. So if some type of tax were to be levied today, under this umbrella of this concept of law, it would have to be the equivalent value of how much that gold coin is worth. Okay, and then yearly. So this is a yearly contract, as I said. And it's just, one of those things is that at the beginning of the year, somebody's responsible for collecting it. Maybe now we have electronic payments and stuff like that, but it would be collected yearly. And then 2 dinars are taken from the middle class and 4 from the affluent. And this comes from, as we read in the book, in the Adillah book from the Sunnah of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, that it's permissible to levy different amounts from different people based on what they're able to what they're able to afford. Okay. And that's determined on how their financial status is at the end of the year. So the Sharia takes into consideration very much the fluctuation of people's wealth. So for example, if you think about zakah, once you come into possession of the minimal zakatable amount of money, and nisab, you have to hold that nisab for a year. If after 6 months you have to spend half of that on some expenses or something else, then you've dipped below nisab, so the whole zakah calculator is gone. You don't have to even worry about zakah. So the Sharia, which I find is something, there is another subject that we need to constantly be thinking about, the philosophy of law. So from the philosophical point of law, if you think about that, that's a very beautiful aspect of Islamic law, that it takes into consideration the ups and the downs in somebody's financial case. So in this case, when he says the affluent or the middle class, how do you determine that? Well, how are they at the end of the year? Like when they file their final tax returns or whatever the case may be, something equivalent, if they have a little bit of extra and then they've now raised themselves to the level of the affluent, okay, we'll take 4, 6, 8, dinars. But if they're lower, in the middle, if maybe 3 or 2 below that, then you only have to pay 1, so on and so forth. So that's also important. And then he says, rahimahullah, it is permissible to stipulate that they accommodate travelers in addition to the jizya. So within the realm of Dar al-Islam, there might be travelers, especially the army, going out to the frontiers, and they might have to stop somewhere. The diyafa for us is 3 days. So, part of the jizya is you will give board to a Muslim traveler, a Muslim citizen, up to 3 days. And then there will be conditions. I didn't want to get into all the details, but the type of foods, how the food is presented, you'll find that in the books of fiqh. and that also is permissible. And the Prophet ﷺ did that when he made peace with the Christians of Jerusalem. That was one of the agreements, is that there would be free passage, and then there would be room and board would offer. So that also is part of the diplomatic. Maybe it's a pre-modern concept. I mean, you can't like fly to France and then just shack up with somebody for 3 days, of course. But in the pre-modern world, that was something that was permissible. Okay, the contract with non-Muslim subjects. So, what is the jizya contract? So now we've talked about who it's a contract, who gets it, how the imam makes the contract, how it's paid, so on and so how much it is, how often it's paid. Now we want to know what is the actual contract. The first thing, I think I'm going to do the first three. The first thing is you have to pay the jizya. Well, obviously you got to pay that amount. The second thing is you have to comply with Islamic law. Now that's important. Comply with Islamic law, meaning in the things that are shared between us. So Islamic law becomes the law of the state. It's the law. That's what the law is. So if you steal something, or if you buy something, or if you broke something, or if you want to rent something, or if you want to gift something, what is the law that's going to adjudicate those things? A Sharia. That's what it means. It does not mean that they cannot run their own religious things on their own. It means in public things, in the things that are shared between us, the mu'amalat, then they are going to follow Islamic law, because that's the standard, form of law. So he says, for example, commenting Al-Bajuri says, التي يعتقدونها دون ما لا يعتقدونه كشرب الخمر, etc. So for them, drinking alcohol is permissible. So okay, then you don't have to follow our part of Islamic law. But the things that you believe that when somebody breaks something, there has to be liability. Okay, so then you're going to follow our rules on liability. You believe that you can rent something, that you can buy something, that you can sell something, so on and so forth. Okay, that's important. And then he says, mention only good things about Islam, meaning that they can't disparage Islam on purpose, but that does not extend to the things that they believe that are counter to Islam. So the things that they believe that are counter to Islam are not considered disparaging. They're allowed to hold that, to say that, talk about amongst themselves with that things. That's here we're saying that somebody just starts insulting the Prophet ﷺ for no reason. Okay, there's no religion that's based, their religious belief is based on that. So that's also a point of plurality. I think this last point, I'll expand on it in the next lecture. This is enough for now, inshallah. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah, in today's lecture, we took a big chunk, almost the entirety of the chapter of jizya. But I spent a little bit of time, actually an entire clip almost, talking about the concept of Ahlul Kitab, because I think it's something very significant. I'm going to repeat it again now for like the third or fourth time. For me, it's very important that you understand that, because you need to, first of all, that's what Islam teaches us. This is what the Prophet ﷺ taught us. So it's not my teaching, this is the teaching of the Quran and Sunnah. And we need to realign ourselves with that, because we have a very open heart when it's talking about dealing with other people. So I spent a lot of time talking about that, and it's in the book, so I mean it's important. But I spent a lot of time talking about it because I want you to see how flexible the Sharia is when it comes to this issue. So we talked about who it's obligatory to take the jizya. That was a very simple conversation. The last one was the people of Ahl Kitab. That's where I kind of spent a lot of time. Then we learned about the minimal amount of the jizya being 1 dinar. We talked about what that means. We said, however, it could be less if it needs be. And you can also have a scale, a sliding scale of the jizya depending on people's financial situation, which is determined at the end of the year. And that the jizya is a tax that's paid yearly. We also said that we could ask, part of the jizya contract is that they give room and board, a diyafa. How does he translate that, a diyafa? Accommodate travelers within Dar al-Islam, for up to 3 days, because that's how much time the Prophet ﷺ told us that diyafa is. And then we began talking about, well, what is the actual contract? Well, the contract is obviously they have to pay the jizya. And then the second thing is that they're going to follow Islamic law in the things that they believe in, meaning the public things that are shared between us. The Sharia becomes the law of the courts, and that's how things are adjudicated, not in the things that are specific to them and not in the things that they disagree with us in belief. They are allowed to continue those practices. And then we ended the discussion about them not allowing to disparage Islam or the symbols of Islam and what that means. It means on purpose to say something hurtful and insulting to Islam, not that they have beliefs that are counter to our beliefs. Those things are not insulting to us because that's their belief. And lakum dinukum waliya din. Here he's talking about the things that are disparaging. Much more needs to be said about that, which we'll defer to the next lecture, inshallah. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.